And welcome in. So I have, geez, after the rankings came out last night, I looked them over. A couple things I disagreed with, a couple things I disagreed with, and I understood where they were coming from. And today I've sat here and just listened to all the faux outrage of one for and welcome in. Couple things last night with the rankings that came out that I disagreed with. Couple things. Number one, SMU being ranked 5 spots behind Miami. Miami still being in the top 12. They weren't in my top 12. But Miami being 5 spots ahead of SMU when they play in the same conference. They both lost one game. The loss for SMU came to BYU, an undefeated team. The loss for Miami came to Georgia Tech. How about the big wins? They both have beaten Louisville. That's both of their best win. And SMU has also beaten ranked Pitt at the time, beat them badly. So if you're just looking at their resumes, SMU's is clearly better, and they're very comparable. They play in the same league. So looking at the resumes isn't everything. How have the teams performed? What are the other metrics? Having Miami 5 spots ahead of them doesn't make much sense. And when they asked the committee why, their answer was basically, we just think Miami's better. Okay. And I think that's the problem with not having a standard format of how you are supposed to choose these things, a guideline of sorts, because you've got some people who want to do it by more of a resume and some people who want to do it by more of a power rating or a Vegas spread. And then you've got others who even throw in some additional things like this take I heard today.
Now we're cooking. Record is exactly where it has to matter. When you talk a dumb thing to say, how many dudes is Texas going to get drafted? And that sounds like a dumb thing to say, but like when you look at the overall like level of talent on this roster, which I think has to matter when you talk about best team for a school like or for an operation like.
Is that something that should matter? He thinks that's something that should have to matter when you're picking the best team. Should it have to matter how many NFL prospects you have on your team? For the college football playoff that was expanded to include teams who weren't getting a shot, teams that, probably have less NFL talent, because we're trying to include more teams in the college football playoff. Should we disqualify them because they don't have NFL players? I think that's the antithesis of what this is about. I think this is about college football. And if you wanted to do roster and you wanted to do Vegas line, it's usually hand in hand. The most talented teams are usually the ones that are always favored. Your Ohio States and Alabamas and Georgias, they're the ones that are favored in most games because they have the most talent. So that's already cooked in the books when we talk about a power rating or a spread. That's already baked in there. You don't need to then add that on top of it. But the faux outrage I've heard over some of this stuff today is just crazy. For instance, Georgia. Everybody is using Georgia today as a thing to maybe get some content out or make some really hot, bold takes. Mike Greenberg of ESPN and Paul Feinbaum. And of all the ways the internet has changed my life and made it better in the last 10 years, like top 10, being able to find college football content alternatives to the crap we used to have to watch on ESPN. By the way, thank you for tuning in. The crap that we have to sit through and watch back then, just unbelievable. And as I watch these little clips on Twitter that pop up of stunts like they pulled today, which I'm not going to play it. If you haven't seen it, just take my word for it. It was performative art to try to make it sound like they were so outraged that Georgia, having 2 really good losses or 2 really good wins in Clemson and Texas in a dominant way, they beat them both, and 2 really bad losses to good teams, 2 teams that dominated them. And I mean dominated them. Ole Miss destroyed them, and so did Alabama. That first half, that was the real story of that game. Alabama played the second half differently, learned a lesson from that in Kalen DeBoer's first big game in the SEC, learned a lesson. He'll never play it like that again in the second half. Georgia went for it every fourth down in that second half. That wasn't true. That wasn't true football, that second half. That was totally different. And props to them for coming back, right? But when the game mattered most, they got destroyed. Their horrendous quarterback play, their near loss at Kentucky, props to them. They came out with a win, 1-point win at Kentucky. Kentucky, a one-win team in the SEC. The Mississippi State game, that was a game really late. They ended up winning that by 10. Mississippi State, the worst team in the league. They've not looked good at all. The first half to Clemson, that wasn't a good half either. They've not looked good. They've not looked like themselves. Yet because of who they've been in previous seasons and because of things like lines, with the respect they're getting still, we look at Vegas, they're before the word that Nico might not play, they started off as a 10.5-point favorite against Tennessee this week. So they're getting that massive amount of respect, not based on this year's team. It's not. It's based on what they've been, how much trust people put in Kirby. And I understand that. It's our tendency, right? It's just how we do things. You got to fight against that sometimes and look at what is being put in front of our face this season. Any of those Georgia teams in the past, have you ever seen them get absolutely destroyed, manhandled, beat up, and quit against a team like Ole Miss? Have you ever seen that? I can't remember it. It's not happened. So that reputation was built off of teams like that. This team is not that team. This team is not that team at all. We've seen flashes, just a couple of it looking like those old teams. The majority of the season has been us scratching our head going, what's wrong with Georgia? Now, when we look at wins and losses, I'm someone who wants to credit big wins more than penalize big losses, which is why if Georgia adds the win against Tennessee, in my rankings, they're going to go way up because now you have wins against Tennessee. Let's pull it up here. Here's what Georgia's resume looks like. Never mind the top there. Here's what Georgia's resume looks like with a win against Tennessee this Saturday. Texas 10-2, most likely. Clemson, that's Texas 10-2 if they lose to A&M. They could be 11-1. Texas, Clemson, Tennessee. And losses to potentially 10-2 Alabama, 10-2 Ole Miss. So that's kind of chalky. I'm even saying that Texas, that's not chalk that they lose to A&M. They're favorites, but let's just say they lose. I did this little chart for separate exercise, but let's just say that happens. That's an excellent resume to me because you've got the three biggest wins of anybody. Nobody else has three wins that big. So because you have three huge wins and because you played a schedule that includes 5 mammoth games, those are 5 huge games. I give you the benefit of the doubt because you didn't have to play that Clemson game. You chose to play that Clemson game. You gave us college football fans a game to look forward to, a game to get up for, and you tested yourselves when you didn't have to. And we're seeing as we go, teams like Indiana, who have played absolutely nobody, played nobody in the non-conference schedule of note. It was horrible, way worse than Ohio State's, which was bad. It was horrible. And they're being rewarded. So do we want teams to continue to schedule like that in the non-conference? Yes, we do. I've been saying all along, they have an opportunity here to make sure that teams continue to schedule and incentivize scheduling big out-of-conference games. Don't screw it up. So that would make you think I'm on the side of this Georgia argument, but I'm not. Because it's got nothing to do to me with that Clemson win or even the fact that they took 2 losses. It's the way they lost and the way they played most of the year, which is not like they traditionally have. It's not like a team that we should be giving the benefit of the doubt to. That said, the fact that they're not in the playoff currently as it sits today means absolutely nothing. They play on Saturday. I think they're very appropriately ranked because you have to, like the results on the field have to matter. Let's take an opinion like this right here.
If you are legitimately a national, I'm all about it. Seeded number 3, ball playoff rankings. BYU at 6. Seeded number 3. And I get it. If we're going off the resume, that's cool, man. I'm all about it. I'm all about it. Have them at 3. Put them at 6. Whatever you want to do. I get it. You have the win over SMU.
If we're going off the resume, I'm all about it. Okay.
Nice. You beat Kansas State. Awesome. I would take any SEC team that is ranked behind BYU, and I would take them with a touchdown and probably take them to cover that spread. Like BYU, I think on a neutral site with South Carolina, gets ragdolled. BYU versus A&M, got nobody blocking Shamar Stewart. BYU and Ole Miss, did we see what Ole Miss did to Georgia? And Georgia did not look great. Is anybody from BYU's roster able to line up in the 2 deep for Georgia? I don't think so.
Here's the thing. I agree with everything he just said. And my response to it is, so what? So what? That's what we think. It doesn't matter, though. That's not what this is about. You win the games in front of you to make it in the playoff. BYU has done that. Is he saying that that undefeated BYU team should be ranked behind those teams because he and I would pick those teams to win? It seems like that's what he's saying. You can't have that. If you have that, scrap the whole system, just go to the 2 conferences and get the Big 12 and the ACC and the G5 totally out of this discussion, because there will very, very rarely be a team anymore out of the Big 12, the new Big 12 without Texas or Oklahoma, that ever is not, that's not going to be the case for. It's always going to be the case, almost always. There have been a few exceptions. I can think of an Oklahoma State team 6-7 years ago. Just few exceptions where in the last dozen years that the champion, if we're take away Oklahoma and Texas, the third best team in the Big 12, would ever be favored over any of the 2 or 3 top Big 10 teams, or maybe 4 or 5 in the SEC. It's never going to happen. But this is what we wanted, right? I want them to be included. I want them to be included as long as they're in the system. You can't just let them in the system and then say, yeah, but we don't think you can play, so you can't be in. It has to matter. The games have to matter. Losing has to matter. Losing twice really has to matter. Heather Dinich is running around repeating this stat. I don't even know what her stat is. Something like in the last 10 years, every year the committee's had a 3-loss team, but it's a misleading stat because that stat includes the 3rd loss coming in the conference championship. So that's not a true 3-loss team. When you hear 3-loss team, you're thinking 9-3. You're thinking LSU right now with 3 losses. She's talking about a 10-2 team that loses in the conference championship. But there are a lot of teams who have had 3 regular season losses who've been included in this format if we take it back 25 years. 51% of the time, there's a 3-loss regular season team that would make it in this format in the last 25 years. 27% of the time, more than one 3-loss team in the regular season. Won't be the case this year because this year, much like 2019, has more quality teams for whatever reason. And I don't anticipate that we're going to see this many teams from 7 to 15 that kind of look like, yeah, they could all make a case. I don't think we're going to see this every year. That's for sure. Probably this will be a year like this will be an exception kind of year, in my opinion. I don't think it's always going to be this tough. Of course, we'll be at 14 before we know it. And then the debate moves down to the next lower numbers, and it never ends. But the bottom line is these guys have got to get on some criteria. This is how we do it step by step. But when you put out some generic term, like the number one mission is to find the quote best team, and everyone has different subjective measures on how they choose who that is, it's just silly, man. It's just silly. So I don't know what the answer is at this point, the way they currently have those rules listed, but I do know nonsense logic when I see it. And the thing was set up to include these other teams, right? And now they're doing their job, winning the games ahead of them, and hopefully scheduling in the future. They didn't have time to, but scheduling in the future in a way that can help them even more. The BYUs and the Indianas of the world, teams like this that now see, okay, and teams of their ilk, well, I see how they're treated. I need to make sure I get big games on my out-of-conference schedule, because my Big 12 schedule, and you look at BYU, even with 2 ranked wins, their Big 12 schedule has them in this situation here, where everybody's crapping on them for being ranked 6 and saying they don't belong. They would be favored over the 5th ranked SEC team would be favored over them by a touchdown. And I don't disagree. But again, that's what I think. There's a reason we play the games. It's not just Juck thinks so or JD Pickle thinks so. Like, that's not what it is. So anyway, I guess the point is it's all going to play out. And these performers getting so enraged about things like Georgia being out of the playoff today when they have an opportunity at a top 10 game. By the way, that schedule is awesome. Like, it's awesome. I love that they're playing that schedule. I think everyone should aspire to play that schedule. And some people saying that if they don't make it in, then people are going to be discouraged from playing a schedule like that or scheduling a big out of conference game like they scheduled Clemson. I really don't want that to happen. I don't want people to be discouraged from that. But at the same time, it's not about the 2 losses. People keep saying they're just going down. Okay, you got 9-1 here and 8-2 here. Well, the 2-loss team goes below. That's not the case. We didn't see that with Alabama. Alabama's above several teams that have lost or that have only lost 1 and they've lost 2. It's the way Georgia lost. It's the way that the first half against Alabama and taking that ultimate loss. And it's the way they just recently, last weekend, got totally manhandled and quit when Jackson Dart got pulled out of the game and they got spotted 7 points. And then you got beat up and you quit by a team that already had 2 losses. So, you get no sympathy for me when you lose like that twice and you've played pretty crappy in a lot of your wins. So anyway, that's the rant. Talk to you soon. Juck on Bucks out. Hey, it's Juck.
Juck? Who is Juck?
Juck on Bucks.
Juck on Bucks. Juck on Bucks.
Juck.
Juck. Juck.
Juck on Bucks.
My guy Juck.
Juck on Bucks.
My buddy Juck.
Juck is
Juck.
the Juck.
It's Juck on Bucks.
Okay. Juck is junk.
The Juck eyes.
The Juck eyes.
Juck on Bucks.
Junk. Juck.
Juck.
Not junk.
Juck.
Juck.